Last week, of course, was budget day, and perhaps not that many surprises with the budget. Will also be remembered last Thursday was the day that there was protests, there was attempted road closures, all sorts of things. Talking about not just the budget, but some of the responses to it. Political commentator Dr. Bryce Edwards. Bryce, kia ora. Good morning.
Morena, Andrew.
So, not really that many surprises in the budget. It all went according to plan. Interested, though, on some of the reactions and responses to it. What was in, what was out, promises kept and promises broken.
Yeah, I went along to the budget lock-up in the Beehive in the hours before it was released, and I was a bit underwhelmed by it all, and I think a lot of other people were, not because it was too left-wing or too right-wing. It just didn't really have that much in it, and perhaps that's exactly what the government wanted. They mostly kept to their promises. They certainly delivered tax relief, and they managed to, have a budget that is relatively fiscally conservative or responsible. And I don't think it really was a vote shifter for many people. I don't think there would have been a lot of people that would have said, hey, I voted for National, I'm not going to vote for them after this budget, or vice versa.
Having said that, though, if they promised tax cuts, even if it was just $25 a week extra, if they didn't deliver tax cuts, that might have been an election loser.
I think that's right.
Something which was promised but not delivered. Some promised cancer drugs. This was something that National campaigned on. Some comments that this is still a priority, but it's been pushed back, which is... that's literally a tough pill to swallow for people who have a current diagnosis.
Yeah, so let's just go back and remember we have this organisation called Pharmac, which is the government's drug buyer agency, but they're independent of the government of the day. They make their own decisions based on the budget they have and what they think they should buy for the public. They haven't been buying a number of very powerful cancer drugs because they're very expensive, frankly. And the government, and there's a lot of public that do want those available, and they're available in a lot of other countries like Australia. So there's been a lot of pressure on politicians to make these available. National campaigned at the last election that there was a list of 13 very effective cancer treatment drugs that don't necessarily treat the cancer and reverse it, but they prolong life for years. And so National promised that they would bring in 13 new drugs and they would make them available to the public for free, but they will pay for it by putting in prescription charges, bringing in that $5 prescription charge. What we had on the budget on Thursday, it was, yes, they were bringing in that prescription charge again, but they didn't have the money to deliver on the drugs yet, and kind of wait and see. We'll get back to you on that.
Yeah, very disappointing in that regard, and in some ways is an election promise. Having said that, though, when the books were uncovered, the economy, the state of the economy, in a much worse space than the government knew about before they were the government. When they were campaigning, they thought there would be more eggs in the basket, as it were.
Yeah, and those are the arguments that National's making, and I'm sure they're right by and large, that the books are worse than they thought. Pharmac's in a more difficult position than they realised financially, but it's not. It's still a broken promise to some extent. National's come back out, Prime Minister Luxon and Nicola Willis yesterday, and said, oh, no, we are still going to deliver this. We just couldn't get it into that first budget. Watch this space. We'll be having an announcement soon. And as far as I can see, that they really have been quite worried by the harsh protests that have happened in the last few days by cancer advocates and patients. And so they have kind of done a bit of a backflip and said, no, we are going to deliver this really soon. So it hasn't been a great move, I don't think, from the government. They have mishandled it. It's not actually a huge amount of money, actually.
Yeah, it does talk about priorities. They do have an ally, of course, joining Pharmac, just about called her Paula Benefit, but Paula Bennett, of course, heading up Pharmac. I mean, there's some questions about that and what happens to
Well,
old national
she'll be the
politicians.
chair.
Yeah,
She takes over as the chair, I think, next month, and she still has to carry out a very independent role.
yeah.
And she's going to have to, convince us that she's not being told by her party what to do.
Independent but friendly to the
Yeah.
incumbent government, I think would be a fair way of saying it. And I mean, questions about independence leads to the other issue, because of course also last Thursday, as well as the budget, there were protests in many different parts of New Zealand. Te Pāti Māori declaring independence. Not sure exactly what that means, but a strong turnout and some strong protests in that regard. But gosh, what a week it's been. Some very serious accusations against a number of individuals, and Te Pāti Māori seems to be at the centre of this, about just what was done with census data in the build-up to last year's election.
Yes, so Te Pāti Māori, really were one of the big success stories of the last election. They came back from just having one MP to now having, six?
Yeah.
And they are kind of buoyed. They really, have a lot of confidence, and so they're taking it to the government. They're taking it to what they call the Pākehā government, the Pākehā economy, and so forth. And they're trying to push forward to have a new Māori parliament. I'm not sure where all that's going to go, but certainly at the same time, there's a lot of questions about the way they run their elections, and the way that they're related to a number of organisations and companies in South Auckland. And so in particular, there was a big story that came out on Sunday in the Sunday Star Times from Andrew Urquhart, detailing how a number of staff that were working in the Manurewa marae are now whistleblowing, if you like, and saying that the marae and the Whānau Ora company they had a contract with the government to collect census information, so collect the census forms, etc. And according to these ex-staff, they were then photocopying the data to give to Te Pāti Māori to help them in the election campaign, so they'd know who to target. And they won the electorate, the Tamaki Makaurau electorate, out there by 42 votes over Labour's Pene Hanare. And so there's some suggestions of a lot of dirty tricks being carried out. Another story's come out today about the alleged use of COVID information, because that marae was also contracted to do COVID immunization in the last few years. And supposedly, allegedly, they've collected a lot of data about, who they've immunized and who they haven't, and used that again to try and win votes. So, this is starting to involve a lot of government agencies. We've got Electoral Commission, Privacy Commissioner, Health New Zealand, I forget, MSD, that are all having to now account for what's happened here, because at least going on the face of what's being alleged here, there's some pretty serious Electoral and Privacy Act violations, and it all involves a number of organisations in South Auckland, primarily the Whānau Ora Commissioning Agency, whose chief executive is John Tamahiri, who was also the president of Te Pāti Māori, who also runs a lot of other trusts, etc. And so people were starting to wonder about whether this is a sort of fiefdom that kind of thumbs its nose at the rules that the rest of us have to abide by.
And hey, perhaps a total coincidence that it was the same week that Te Pāti Māori declared independence from the Pākehā government, but certainly a terrible look, and some serious allegations, given how close the election was in this particular electorate. I mean, we're talking stolen election in some ways. Where will this go? Certainly there'll be some questions asked, potentially some court cases brought, but could the results in this electorate be overturned? Do you think? Could it go as far as that?
Look, I'm struggling to answer that question, but I think the answer is yes. It's very complicated. And certainly the Labour Party have been quiet on this until recently. And so Chris Hipkins came out yesterday saying that there is a need for a wide-ranging, proper investigation into what's happened.
Yep.
And Penny Hanare is saying he's talking to his lawyers, etc. He's watching this, and that could well happen. And this also is quite consequential potentially for the next election because, of course, Te Pāti Māori are somewhat aligned with Labour and the Greens in the opposition and are potentially a government in waiting.
Yep.
But this could blow apart some of those alignments, and it could lead to a lot of pressure, especially on Labour, to condemn some of these things happening, especially if they're proven to be correct, and perhaps even to rule out having Te Pāti Māori in government with them after the election, just in the same way that Hipkins ruled out having New Zealand First and condemned National for having them in a coalition. So I think this is quite consequential and it needs a lot more scrutiny.
It certainly it is a bit of a battleground between Labour and Te Pāti Māori in terms of the Māori seats, and I suppose taking sides on that one would be very interesting politically. But also, I suppose, some of the broader questions about allegiances and who gets contracts and spheres of influence and some of the stuff that's happening behind the scenes. I'm sure more questions need to be asked in that sphere as well. Bryce, thank you so much for your commentary. As always, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Andrew.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.